A thunder of jets and an open... Oops, wrong script. Well, given the nature of the topic of this week's video, it'd be understandable that this Combinoff pair would be mistaken for the original Moose and Squirrel. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, today's Nevertome video will delve into the history of another set of characters that came straight out of the pages of my upcoming book, Petalia's Wish, making this a 2-for-1 bio. To start off, let me introduce the Neverbeings of the hour, Wilscott J. Caribou, and his lovely squirrel girl, Class 4A, Commander Juniper Squirrel Caribou. Now let's hear it for them out there, everybody. I'm hoping that there are some eagle-eyed viewers out there who would be able to say, I've seen these two before. Technically, that would be true, and the proof is in their names. Let's start with Wilscott, a horned and hoofed creature who acts as the straight man to Juniper's humor and madcap antics. Stretching the truth a little here. Like with Class 4A Juniper, Wilscott is named after the voice actor who not only co-created the legendary Rocky and His Friends, later known as the Bullwinkle Show and Rocky and Bullwinkle in syndication, Bill Scott was half the voice of the entire show, along with Paul Frees and June Foray. Bill Scott was Bullwinkle J. Moose, Dudley Do-Right, Mr. Peabody, and apart from being half the cast herself, June Foray was our all-American hero, Rocket J. Squirrel. Going further with the metaphysical motif, not only were the characters patterned after Jay Ward's creations, who were near and dear to my heart, Juniper and Wilscott are also fans of the show and the Jones Sisters universe themselves. But that's where the similarities end, for the most part. While for most of my life, I myself have had my suspicions of Rocky's gender, I wanted to explore what a true female flying squirrel's life would be like with a moose-like hubby. Energetic, semi-sassy, and that one cool ant figure whom everyone has. That's right, Aunt Karen, I'm talking about you. Juniper marks all those checkboxes. A proud cadet and graduate of the Faith Forces training school, Juniper is a flying ace who serves the Never Tribe and her fellow Neverbeings in the Petalia verse and the Great Myriad at large. Like her namesake's character, Juniper goes to great lengths to do what is right and just, often at her own peril. The first example that comes to mind is one we'll discuss later in the video, regarding a certain snow owl and her first ever bout with a terrible illness. Juniper comes from a long line of noble squirrels, chipmunks, minks, and a few mice peppered along her long-standing roots. While it is unknown outside of using a time mapping spell whether or not Juniper's family is actually still alive or not, one of her distant ancestors, an ant, the sister of her great-great-great-grandmother via her mother, the royal consort of Princess Delania of the Neverscape, is still alive. Her name is Roxy Boyatom, a germophobic, shape-shifting squirrel who can take on Pixian forms and a human fae form. But that's for another video. While there is no apparent metaphysical connection to Earth, there have been those who could swear that she and Wilscott have been seen once or twice at Jay Ward Studios as stunt doubles for Rocky and Bullwinkle's exploits in the first season. But the source for this quote appears to be unreliable, because he had to take off his straitjacket when we gave him the waiver to sign for this video.
Today's NeverDex video is brought to you by Or You Kidding Me Giblet Gravy Cookies. Invited to a party by a schoolmate or employer you can't stand? Don't turn them down, use it to your advantage. Made with only the soupiest turkey drippings, greasiest gizzard bits, topped with the blandest of carob-flavored wafers, OMKY cookies, the only thing worse than OJ and toothpaste.
While Juniper has had a long role in the mythos, it has not been as deeply laden as Winona's story in the last video, so this is going to be separated into certain points in her life, showing who she was and how she grew as a person, and how it laid the foundation for what was to come. The first logical place to start is with her relationship to her Combinoff, the gentle blue giant himself, Wilscott Caribou. As of the year 20XX, Wilscott and Juniper have been Combinoffs for nearly 15 Never years. During their time as students of Firefox and Snow Tiger, Juniper and her dear friend Cello had not given that much thought to the dating scene, focusing mainly on their crafts and their dreams. Cello's aspirations were of being a musician, and Juniper was setting her sights on the Fae Forces, a Neverscapian version of the Air Force, but with fairy dust instead of 4-engine jets. In her graduate training with Major Cloudwind of Queen Aurora's Special Forces, Juniper was not impressed with the hotshot cadets who were always trying to make passes at her, most of them being humanoid fae and not animalistic Neverbeings like her, but that was beside the point. One day, during stunt flying, Juniper had been flying too fast, and her tail began to singe amid the friction of air, and she tailspun straight into a funnel cloud somewhere over the lagoon. The next thing she knew, it was 7 hours later, and a kind stranger had brought her to his cave, using his bulk to mash berries into a vitamin paste that would heal her jangled nerves. The cave was rather dank and dark, but the cold atmosphere was perfect for her. She had finally felt relaxed after so much time at the academy. As she opened her eyes, she heard the sound of hooves on stone. The bashful figure stayed in the dark, but nudged the plate into the light. Neither Neverbeing had said a word yet, but the aroma of the paste was too intoxicating to ignore, and Juniper began to nip away at it. Juniper downed the entire plate of vitamin paste, and she could feel the soul print of the individual who made it for her. This mystery creature had been keeping track of Juniper's athletic flying events, and she could detect that this gentleman had tired himself out by trying to intercept her before she could hit the ground after passing out in that funnel storm. Wilscott, the name she had plucked from his mind, had saved her life. Outside of the cave, hail could be heard, and it was forecast to be a long storm, so Juniper finally started the conversation, complimenting him on the delicacy that he made and his hospitality. One look at Wilscott's face, and Juniper finally saw why he was hiding. He had been blushing. He was smitten with his guest. Juniper was not at all surprised, considering that she could feel his blush in his voice, something that only an empath would be able to discern. By the end of the night, Juniper had found her soulmate, and decided to move out of the Never Tribe's barracks, the start of their road to Combinofthood. Wilscott was Juniper's rock during the island's worst times, and was often her voice of reason when it was called for. About 6 Never years before 20XX, Dainty had found herself a soulmate in the form of a rattlesnake named Ross the Rattler, and this made Juniper livid, believing that this serpent had somehow brainwashed Dainty and was planning to nix her. Not even the stamp of approval of Dainty's big sister Demuria, who had also combined with a different classification of Neverbeing, mammal, reptile, and/or insect, was not enough to temper Juniper's dagger eyes against the pacifistic Ross, believing that he was going to slip up sooner or later. Wilscott knew that the best thing to do for Juniper when she was this upset was to help her unwind, usually by taking long walks through the island's various geographical zones. For nearly a week, Wilscott wore his hooves down to the fetlocks, just to give Juniper rides on his back and speak sweet nothings to her. The 7th day found them in the Never Canyons near the snake community's outskirts, when Wilscott tripped over a root and fell into a ditch, landing on and breaking Juniper's tail. Wilscott was unable to help himself back up, and Juniper was unable to fly to get help, so she romped out of the ditch so that she could use her Faith Force flare gun, but another rattlesnake in a mugger outfit had ambushed her and bit her as the flare went up. Juniper was in so deep a shock from the pain from Rancor's bite that she had forgotten her Faith Force's training as the sinister serpent was ready to launch his next offensive on his victim. Acting purely on berserk impulse, Wilscott screamed and stampeded to the assassin, impaling the scaled bastard before he knew what hit him. While this was happening, Dainty and her beloved Ross had rushed to the rescue thanks to the flare in the sky and some Never Tribe magic. Scared to the quick, Ross began to suck out the poison from the now passed out Juniper. Thankfully, Ross had gotten there in time to drain the majority of the lethal toxin from Juniper's bloodstream, while Dainty's teleport spell sent Juniper to Galatea, clear on the other half of the island. In the meantime, Wilscott was frozen in position. heaving deeply at the sight that lay before him. Rancor's body was stabbed all the way through in multiple places. So much blood was spilt, and Wilscott was devastated at what he did, forgetting the reason why he did it. The trauma of seeing Rancor lifeless and remembering the high pitch of the Marauder's final wail, the pain that he must have felt. Ross laid it out for Will. Rancor was a murderer, and he would have killed them without even a thought. It was going to come down to Juniper or Rancor, and Will had chosen wisely. He chose the one who truly mattered the most, Juniper. But sadly, it would be a long time before those words finally resonated with Will. In her hospital room, Juniper made peace with Ross, and here's what she said. During her school days, Juniper and Cello had become thick as thieves when she first heard the young Hopper's complex music and felt the genuine kindness in Cello's heart. That same night, Cello had invited Juniper over for dinner with her brother, Stratocaster, and their folks, Churro and Edmund. When she arrived at Hopper Hills that first night, Juniper was well received by the men, but when Churro came out of the kitchen, Juniper was in for a shock, as she never would have imagined that Cello's mother was in reality a black widow spider. As Churro went to hug her guest, Juniper screamed, prompting a downtrodden Churro to quietly skitter back into the kitchen, sobbing. In the middle of the neighborhood, there was a small park with a pond. Juniper looked sadly into her reflection and hated what she saw. And what she saw was a coward and a failure and a fink staring back at her. Just then, a dark cloth of silk was wrapped around her eyes from behind. The voice of the culprit calmly told Juniper that she, too, was a spider and that she was keeping her distance, trying to better understand this stranger. For nearly an hour, the two of them just sat there and talked, and Juniper learned that the spider's name was Celia and that Cello was her cousin. Celia brushed off Juniper's actions towards Churro, her aunt, as understandable, and that it was nothing they both weren't used to. Juniper heard another sob and decided that enough was enough. She was done hiding. No matter what her new friend looked like, Juniper was ready to hug this other black widow spider. And so saying, she ripped off the blindfold, only to be infatuated by the image that she saw before her. Celia, with red hair, blue-tinted eyes, and a modest hairstyle, not that different from Churro Hopper, invoked a different feeling in Juniper than it would have. This creature before her was one of the loveliest specimens she had ever met, and her arachnophobia had been cured by her. It was completely gone. The two new friends hugged, and Juniper had lamented that she wished that Churro was there to see how sorry she truly was. Now this part was never revealed to her, but Celia had been sent by her Aunt Churro, and a Psychon link had been opened to her the entire time. So the compliments that Juniper had conveyed to Celia about her aunt had actually reached their intended audience. In the year 20XX, a fortnight prior to the arrival of Mina Elachad and Spencer Jones to the Petalia verse, Magnolia the Snow Owl had come down with a terrible affliction. Unable to get out of bed, and combating a slew of symptoms she had never felt before: clanging migraines, horrible physical pains, nausea, chills, and a higher than usual fever normally exhibited by a sick Neverbeing. The Toxanon manual had dictated that what she had was a rare strain of avian flu. Now, it should be noted that Juniper was a teenager when Magnolia was born, and had known her for her entire life. Magnolia, being a vegan and a pacifist, never felt anything from Juniper other than love and kindness. She was never a threat to them like other birds of prey from Earth might have been, but Magnolia only wanted friends, nothing else. It was because of Magnolia's immense regard for others that possessed Juniper to toss aside everything else that was going on and tended to Magnolia night and day. Whenever her ice bag needed to be rechilled, Juniper would zip through the air 7 miles north to Celia's apartment building just to get ice from the machine down the hall. When Magnolia was cold, Juniper brought her blankets from home and even contributed her vest to the cause. It was not long before Juniper and Magnolia's absence was felt by their inner circle, especially to Petalia. 2 days had gone by since Magnolia had first been found passed out on her floor, and Juniper zipped back to the Neverwoods to Wilscott to tell him that she was okay. The odd thing about this particular strain of avian flu was that all males, avian or otherwise, were twice as likely to be in grave danger by it than females. So Wilscott had warned all of their male friends to stay as far away from Magnolia's tree houses as possible. The other part of his mission was to round up their female friends and enlist their help, all without tipping off Petalia as to what was going on. Cello and her sister V combined Tetrazin kept Petalia occupied by bringing little Zimri to play with her. Now, I suppose you're curious about whether or not it was actually necessary to believe that Petalia would be even more frantic than anyone else in this instance. But sad to say, when there is anyone she loved who was in need or in pain, Petalia the Neverblossom will do anything and everything to help that person or persons, often at great danger to herself if she was ever to leave her soil. And it was this monumental empathic prowess that Petalia possessed that everyone else had severely underestimated, for she was determined to find out what everyone was hiding from her about Magnolia. Those deep blue eyes of Petalia's were the bane of anyone who dared to keep a secret from her. Demuria, a skilled Zetascape Special Forces agent, cracked under the mere pressure of Petalia's silent stare, revealing the source of Magnolia's absence in the call. Petalia tried to uproot herself so that she could go to Magnolia's aid, but was outmuscled by the smallest margin from the combined team of Tetra, Churro, Celia, and Cello. Fortunately, Lil Zimri's aura of good fortune allowed for the solution to the problem of helping Magnolia to be revealed, when a loose petal of Petalia's was accidentally pulled out by her. Petalia realized that her blossoms could be made into a tea for healing, just like it had been done for another dear friend of theirs, Sylvia the Silkworm. The final night of Magnolia's throes saw the boiling of this miracle tea, and at Juniper's guidance, Magnolia drank it down, and 3 sips later was completely cured. And thinking clearly again for the first time in 2 weeks, Juniper was met with a feathery and tearful hug from the young owl and passed out with a smile on her face. Fearing the worst, Magnolia brought Juniper out of the treehouse and begged Wilscott and Petalia to look her over. She looked down at the slumbering squirrel who had dropped everything to stay with her and nurse her back to health for 2 whole weeks without sleep, which was what earned Juniper the most sacred honor that a Neverbeing could bestow upon the other: tears of love. Now, the most controversial of all Juniper's friendships was one that she had kept secret for many, many years. Like Petalia, there were other plant elemental Neverbeings who were sentient. One of them was a bullying behemoth named Bramber, a literal creature of brambles and thorns. On the surface, Bramber was a bombastic and menacing figure who took delight at others' misery. Juniper and Will had known Bramber for as long as they had been a couple, and had met through their mentor figures Snow Tiger and Firefox. What was evident was that the true Bramber was a mystery, even to himself, as his mind split from past traumas he had witnessed, and the cycle was doomed to be repeated when Snow Tiger and her Combinoft went missing. Juniper and Will teamed up with Bramber to search the island for clues, the latter reluctantly bringing in a nemesis of his, Bruno the Boar, into his confidence and onto the search team. Juniper and Will had been following a red herring trail courtesy of the marauders who snatched the princesses from the Never tribe. With the aid of Demuria and Baxter, the foursome trekked into the underground of the Serpent Canyon. While only Bramber and Baxter knew what really happened in the underground, Bramber himself had blocked out witnessing Bruno's murder in the underground tunnel. Juniper had rendezvoused with Bramber, but by this point he was in a fugue state, and Juniper had mistaken it for hibernating, so the only thing that she could think of was to gather some fruits and nuts and berries for him. When he awoke several months later, his only lingering memories from that time were of Juniper and Will, and everything else was blocked out. And so was his true self when the two friends were gone from his presence. Their voices were the only thing that would Pavlovically trigger the return of his original facet, something that Juniper would not learn of until the true cause of it all had returned, the Quilliads. And finally, the most important subject that one must know about Juniper is that she madly loves Petalia the way only a mother and aunt would, all in one. Petalia was a still germinating seed when Juniper, Dainty, and Cello were Firefox's protégés, and each felt a strong love for their mentors and their two daughters, Magnolia and Petalia. The circumstances that led Petalia to become an orphan were still shrouded in mystery by the time Petalia had sprouted from the ground, but Juniper and Will both became lifelines to the disarming little wildflower, who reminded them of their own magtis named Viviana. The thing about Petalia was that she had a natural allure to the animalistic Neverbeings of this Neverzone, being kept hidden from the humans for her safety. Juniper adored Petalia, and knew that others did too. So she would take turns doing what so many others loved to do for Petalia on cold nights, staying up all night with her, wrapping her in their warm woolly coats by snuggling close to her. In Juniper's case, she would envelop Petalia in her brown bushy tail and her blue vest and would play Squirrel Doku or word search puzzle books during the night. This was a familiar ritual to Petalia, one that she took great comfort from, but always felt a sense of guilt about her friends doing this for her. But there was a selfish desire that each one of them felt in doing it. They got to spend time with the flower they adored so much, the one who gave so much of herself, not wanting anything in return but their love. Juniper took this as a win-win, until the time had arrived when Celia's passion project was complete, a special blue blankie made of her signature Blue Moon silk. Even with Petalia in another Neverzone, and her own magtis Viviana under the care of Lord Dajanotan Saul, Juniper always made it a point to make frequent visits to both the Never tribe and to the Elichads as they would all allow, which was tantamount to each installing a revolving door for her. Juniper Squirrel is many things: a fighter, a protector, an explorer, an occasional nudist. Well, at least that's what she thinks. A romantic, a tomboy, but all these little things add up to a creature of raw beauty and heart, with the occasional penchant for grace. After Petalia and Gloria left, Juniper was instated as a full-time counselor for Toxanon, formerly just being a temporary member. But in addition to the secret that she had to keep about Bramber being her friend, so too did Juniper have to keep one more secret to herself, a royal one that meant life or death to the secret heirs to the throne of the Neverhive. With the return of the Quilliads, however, the time might be nigh for her to break her silence. And that's the story of Juniper Squirrel and Wilscott Caribou to date. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about any of the characters that you've seen in this video, visit jonessisterscomic.home.blog, or if you want to see a video of them made, please let me know in the comments below. PANSFORM and fly out.